Begin. All right, so welcome everyone to Running Enjoyable Tabletop Role-Playing Games. To give you some background, for those who don't know me, I've been playing tabletop RPGs since I was 9, back in 1979, and I've been GMing since 1984, so that actually is over 40 years, which is a hell of a long time. But anyway, that doesn't mean I know everything about role-playing, far from it. I continue to learn with each and every game I play and I run. And so this course is sort of written using the information I've learnt over a lifetime of gaming. And while not all of it will probably apply to you, as this is my particular style, hopefully you will get something out of it. And there are some tips in here that I think that everybody will get something from. So I'll move forward. So we'll start by looking at the first part of the course that I hope to finish tonight. If we get it all done in time, if not, it'll be in a second and or third session. So 4 different areas that I'd like to cover. One is foundations of fun. So the role of the GM, what makes the game fun for everyone, and knowing your table. Building a game that wants to be played. So creating real breathing worlds that with interesting plot hooks, intriguing storylines and seeds, and balancing structure and sandbox. The art of session flow, which is super important. Session pacing is perhaps one of the most important skills for a GM to have, and for games like any horror games like Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, or whatever, is just critical to making it work. How to manage the spotlight and running combats that don't drag, which is a common problem. And finally, for this section, we'll cover improvisation and player wrangling. And no, that's not writing players. That's how to use the power of yes, how to handle derailment of your best laid plans, which happens to every GM, and how to handle rules disputes. The next session is going to cover some other things like tools of the trade, prepping like a pro, the importance of props, music, maps, as well as digital tools. Beyond the dice, building player investment, which is, again, another super important element of running a sustained RPG. Reading the room and being a GM, not a god, because unfortunately some GMs think that they're God, and that can be quite difficult for players to get around. Then we move into long-term success, how to build a sustainable campaign. And I have run many campaigns over the years. I think the longest campaign I ever ran was for about 6.5 years. But I have run many that have run for at least a year. So, and how you, as the GM, level up. Yes, you level up. And then finally, the art of the game. So just some final words on how to run enjoyable tabletop RPGs. So let's launch into the first part, Foundations of Fun. And I'm going to get you to indulge me for a moment and let me tell you a story. This story isn't about my vanity, but it's an example of building the foundations for a story that draws the players into it and engages them for the upcoming session. So, the standoff at Sunset Bridge, Legend of the Five Rings. The wind carries the scent of wisteria and wet stone across the wide courtyard of Sunset Bridge, where white crane banners snap in the late day breeze. The bells of the distant shrine tolls the hour of the monkey. Shadows stretch long across the flagstones, sharp and lean, as if the world itself is holding its breath. A perfect circle of fresh rice flour waits at the courtyard's heart, precise, sacred, and ominously still. Doji Kiyomi stands at the edge of that ring, her footsteps light as snowflakes. She is small and composed, her silks dyed with pale blue and morning mists, her expression unreadable. The Daishio at her side rests with quiet confidence, a part of her as natural as breath. Barely past her 20th summer, Kiyomi holds herself with the poise of seasoned steel, focused, motionless, and honed to a single purpose. Across from her, Matsu Dagon approaches like a gathering storm. His heavy armor creaks as he moves, each step bold and unapologetic. He carries his mempo casually in one hand. He won't need it today. Battle scars crisscross his exposed arms and jaw, trophies of real war and hard-won victories. He grins as though he already knows the outcome. The crane sends a child to teach me manners, he growls, his voice like gravel shaken in an urn. Kiyomi's gaze doesn't waver. Only the lion would mistake restraint for weakness, she says. The air between them thickens. A rippling of breath moves through the gathered onlookers. Only a dozen samurai, but the tension is enough to make even cicadas fall silent. A shrine monk stands nearby, chanting a soft Benton hymn. Beneath his breath, the words curling like incense in the stillness. He raises a single cherry blossom, pinching it delicately between his fingers. It trembles faintly in the breeze. When the blossom falls, the duel begins. But for now, it waits, suspended like fate itself. The role of the game master: facilitator, storyteller, referee, and fan of the players. As a facilitator, your job isn't to command the spotlight. It's to ensure that every player gets to shine in it. You set the stage, you explain the rules, you help the group navigate the experience smoothly, you introduce the setting. You watch for moments when someone is unsure, hesitant, or needs a little encouragement, and you help them step in confidently. What does that mean, step in confidently? Well, it means you help to bring them into the game. A facilitator also knows when to step back, let the players run with the scene, solve a puzzle, or interrogate that random fishmonger for 30 minutes. The GM doesn't always need to be the center of attention. You manage the pacing, speeding up when things drag, slowing down for emotional beats, and keeping the group engaged through transitions. The analogy here is that you're the conductor of the orchestra. You're not playing all the instruments, but you're making sure that all the symphony works in harmony. All the players work as a team, work as a group. That doesn't necessarily mean that the players don't have opposing goals or anything like that, but it means you keep the group moving forward. You're also the storyteller. You're the voice of the setting, the fate spinner, the unexpected twist around the corner. As you saw earlier, you describe the environments, you give the NPCs their quirks and motives, create drama through conflict, choice, consequences. And great storytelling is not about exposition, it's about evocation, it's about painting with details that matter and letting the players imagine the rest. If you go back to the story that I just told you for L5R, there was a lot of imagery in what I had written and what I was telling you as listeners. And this is what evocation is. It's a really important tool for any GM to sort of master. You do create the narrative arcs, yes, but you also respond dynamically to player choices because the story isn't just yours. It is shared at the table and often in ways that you as a GM cannot possibly guess before a session starts. You also, as a storyteller, get to use things like foreshadowing, callbacks, and themes to make the game feel cohesive and emotionally satisfying. For those who don't know what foreshadowing is, it's, I guess, a hint or a story seed for something that's coming. You'll often watch a movie, a horror movie in particular, and you'll get this overwhelming sense of something coming. That's foreshadowing. Callbacks are often calling back to previous scenes before the current one. And I'll explain something that I've done with a callback recently in a game that might make sense. And themes are a classic example was L5R at the start there. There was a very clear theme I was aiming for in that scene that drew you into what was happening between the two combatants. Going back to callbacks, a classic example of a callback was in my first session of Stars Without Number that I ran recently. The players began the game at a spaceport on the world of Virion 9 in a crowd, listening to watching the last space shuttles take off from the planet and being told by the government over loudspeakers that there was an issue with the planet and everyone needed to get onto a shuttle as soon as possible because they thought the planet was going to explode. The callback there was we then went back to each player in turn to an hour before that particular scene and what they were doing and how they ended up getting to the spaceport. So the analogy here is you're not writing a novel. You're building a living story that breathes in the space between die rolls and player decisions. And took me a long time to learn this because I do write a lot. But you can write the best scenes, narrative, or everything you want, but it doesn't truly become a role-playing game until the players put their touch on it. As the referee, you uphold the game's rules, not to restrict the players, but to empower them through some sort of consistent structure. I've played and run games over the years that don't have a lot of structure, and that's great for some players, but the vast majority of players need some form of structure for them to understand how to play the game. And if you think of the analogy of a board game, you sit down at a table and someone pulls out a piece of paper and starts playing a board game without any rules, then people don't know what to do. So you resolve conflicts, you interpret rules, you make rulings on edge cases the system doesn't cover. The key rule here, if I can't give you anything else, is it's the rule of fun. If a ruling doesn't make it fun for the players, you just shouldn't let it happen. At the end of the day, it's better to make a ruling that is wrong, that is a fun rule, than a correct rule that impedes the players from having fun. So fairness and consistency are a key. You don't just do it to keep the game balanced, but you do it to maintain trust. So be consistent. Sometimes the rules take a backseat to the drama. Other times the rules create drama on their own. Know when to honor both. I guess what that really says here is sometimes, and a lot of GMs who run D&D and Pathfinder and things struggle with this a bit. Sometimes you just need to forget the rules exist because it actually impedes a particular scene with the players. Other times, the rules very much drive that. So when in doubt, adjudicate with transparency. Explain your reasoning behind making a decision, and when possible, invite collaborative problem solving. The analogy, you're the invisible hand of justice, firm, impartial, and always working to keep the game fun and clear. If you're doing it right, the players aren't even going to notice. And finally, the 4 core components to being a good GM is being a fan of the players, the champion of the cool moments. And this is one that new GMs often forget or don't even know. You are the player's biggest cheerleader. You want them to be awesome, clever, tragic, heroic, terrifying, or whatever else it is that they're trying to do. Whatever flavor they're bringing to the table, you want to encourage it. You set up all the moments for them to succeed, fall, and grow. You celebrate their triumphs and give weight to their failures. And it's important to note here that, yes, sometimes players fail. That's okay. It's actually some of the best moments in role-playing games are where a player has failed at something particularly important in the game, but it leads to a whole wealth of role-playing and character development that just wouldn't have happened if they had have succeeded at that stupid role or that stupid task they were trying to do. So be aware that's super important. Allow your players to fail. Even if your NPCs are against them, you as the GM are always on their side. In the past, I have seen some GMs that are very adversarial with their players. It never ends well. Players don't want to feel that they're having to battle the GM. Sure, they want to battle that evil warlock who wants to kill them and turn them into his army of undead minions or whatever, but they don't want to feel that the GM is sitting there targeting them and trying to kill them or trying to break them, or it's just not something that you should do as a GM. So you build tension not to punish, but to let them break through it in style. So you do build tension, you do create problems for them, you do put um, things in front of them to challenge them, but never as a way to punish a player. That will be the first way you lose players. So you're the director who claps the loudest when the actors nail their scene. Their story is your standing ovation. There is nothing more satisfying than seeing a group of players succeed at a particularly tough challenge within an adventure, and it's the ones that the players remember the most. So, final thoughts for this first section. A good GM wears many hats, but the magic happens when you weave all four roles together: the facilitator, the storyteller, the referee, and the fan. When you do it right, table leans in, the dice fall silent, and everybody just for a minute believes. Any questions about that first section? Either I've lost you all or you're there's no
No,
questions.
no, that was fine, man. That was really
It
good.
looks very good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as long as all the players are on the same page, I think is the biggest problem.
Mm.
And that is definitely a part of it. But as a GM, you can guide that somewhat. And I do talk about that later on, about how you get that player investment and engagement. But I found over the years, and this is probably the hardest thing I think as a GM, and certainly the thing I struggle the most with, is just being consistently doing the things that we've spoken about in regard to facilitating and being the fan. That's a big one. Being the fan of the players is a big one.
Do you often do like a session zero before a campaign to see what the players are looking to get out of you?
Yes. Yes, and I've been doing it before session zero was a thing.
Yeah. And do you sort of like weed out players to go, or do you change your story to go for the players?
A bit of both. There are some non-negotiables for me as a GM, and I will say this to every GM. You have a list of non-negotiables for how you want to run a game before you start it. It's okay to say no. It's okay to say, hey, I don't think that this game is going to be for you, to a player. That's okay. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that not only the players are enjoying what they're doing, but you're enjoying running it. Too often GMs go, oh, yep, oh, I need 6 players. Oh, I'm just going to take these 6. We'll make it work. No, you should actually say, as part of your session zero, and I will cover session zero a bit later, but you should always say, these are my expectations. Recently, I actually finished a Pathfinder game that I've been running for quite a while because my expectations around the players weren't meeting what was actually happening around turning up and things like that. And so that might sound a little bit cold and a little bit, I don't know, rude, but if I'm going to sit there and I'm going to put in all the time I put in to run a game for someone and make it the best I can, my expectation is that they're going to do the bare minimum of what my expectations are in that game. And that might be turning up regularly, or if they can't turn up, mate, let me know in advance, or if they want to play something a particular way, tell me about it, all that sort of stuff. All right. Are there any other questions around this bit, or shall we move on?
Sorry, Shane. There's a
Yeah,
couple
go.
of questions in the chat. So Lane asked that
Ah,
you mentioned about part where if there's a shy player, how you get them involved in the game.
Shy players. Yes. Okay. Shy players are really good. And I do actually have a whole section on shy players later on, but I'll touch on it very quickly now here, Ant. So shy players are just another form of player. So it really comes down to sharing spotlight, player agency, which we'll discuss in the very next session, both of those points, but also knowing your table and knowing the players at your table and getting to know them and knowing what their expectations are. And going back to session zero, that is a really key point of session zero, is to understand what the players also want. What are they looking for? And sometimes you will get a player who just, it isn't the right game for them. They're looking for something different. Other times, you'll have a lot of trouble getting out of that player what they're looking for. But you do need to persevere and really talk to them, find out what are they expecting. So you're joining a game of the One Ring. What are you expecting from this game? What is it as a player that you're thinking will happen? What is your expectations around your character? They might be playing a hobbit and they might say, I expect to be like Frodo and live out this epic journey. So already, just in that one sentence, they've given you some plot hooks, some story seeds, and an idea on how to give them some of the spotlight. Does that at least partially answer your question?
I can't speak for Lane, but yeah, it made sense with me. Um,
Oh, good.
I have a question as well.
Yep.
So you mentioned about essentially players failing the task. This is something which quite throws me quite a lot, especially if it's key to the story developing. What
Yep.
would be a good way to manage this?
So a player failing a test and how to keep managing it. Well, not all fails should be catastrophic. So let's take, for example, I know you know this particular scene I'm about to play for you. So there's a certain group of players heading towards Hilltop who happen to find that there's a whole heap of goblins there. And they make their checks and they don't get seen. But what if one of them fails and fails at a critical moment and is seen? Well, then you can actually, as the GMs, pivot and go, okay, they've been seen. Let's do a really interesting chase scene. Let's get them being chased through the marshes. Let's put a little bit of tension in the air. Let's make every roll or everything they do for the next 10 minutes a part of that. You can be sitting there as the GM and go, I know that I'm going to let them escape, but they don't necessarily need to know that. So that's an example, I guess, a real world example.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. All right. Any other questions from this section? Nope. All right. Let's move on. All right. So what makes a game fun for everyone? 4 pillars of a great tabletop experience: player agency, story momentum, challenge, and shared spotlight. So player agency is super powerful and also an area, particularly new GMs, you can get lost. It's really important for players to feel their decisions matter, even if they don't. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that example I just gave Ant of running through the marshes, escaping the goblins. I know as a GM that I'm going to let them escape because that allows me to continue to take the story along the way. But the players don't. So make them roll. Make them think that every roll matters. Make them think that the game, that a failure here is catastrophic or could be really disastrous for their character. And you know what? Even if they make it, you can then pivot as a GM and say, okay, so let's capture them. Maybe the goblins are intrigued as to why they're there. Maybe the goblins don't want to fight. Maybe they're a little scared. There's a whole range of things you can do there. But the important thing here is to make the players feel like their decisions matter. That is super important. A player who doesn't feel like they have a choice in what is happening basically locks out of the game. You've lost their interest because nobody wants to play a game where they're railroaded. A classic example, and I'm not going to mention any names here, but I have played a game in the last year or two where the GM basically didn't allow players to make decisions. And it was probably the worst game I played in for quite some time, simply because me as a player felt that no matter what I did or could do, it didn't matter. And so why play the character? So let them change the world, let them disrupt your plans, and let them take unexpected paths. Being clear on here, changing the world, you can take that as literal as you want. Some GMs find that they allow small changes and that works for them and their group. Other GMs find that they can allow the players to make massive changes and that also works for them. I find, for me personally, that I normally have an idea of the things that are in the game world I'm running that are not changeable. So, for example, if we go back to our very at the start of our L5R game, there are certain key players like the Emperor and things in that I would not allow the players to change that character unless I felt that it really restricted their enjoyment of the game. In which case, then I would pivot and try and think of a way that I could build in their changes to my overall story or the overall story that we were running together. Allow your players to say things like, "We want to talk to the villain," and don't shut the door. Let them surprise you. A real common problem with D&D. I say D&D probably because it's only super popular, but a lot of GMs and groups become very insular, and it's all about kicking in the door and whacking the creature for 12 hit points of damage and taking the gold and getting the next magic item. Allow them to try a different way. If you've got a player at the table, and going back to, I think it was Ant's original question about shy players. Shy players are often the ones that come up with the best plans. Listen to them. Allow them to have their moment. Allow them to say, "Hey, what about this victim, this villain? What's his motivation? Why is he doing this? Let's talk to him. Let's see if we can come to a compromise." Agency isn't about big plot decisions. It's in how they solve problems, define their characters, and interact with NPCs. So by that, it's really giving the players agency to do whatever they want while still maintaining the integrity of the story. And the integrity of the story means that the story is fair and inclusive to everyone. That's probably the biggest thing here. The best laid and the best written stories often go far off track thanks to player agency, but that's also what makes them some of the best games ever. So people don't want to watch a story unfold, they want to be part of it. That is the key driving point behind player agency. Players want to be a part of the story. They don't want to be a passenger. Story momentum, keeping the wheels turning. So even in a sandbox, things should happen. As a GM, you should make the world continue to breathe and move, whether the players act or not. If a really cool tool for making your world breathe is having a timeline. Doesn't have to be massive, doesn't need to be 15 pages. Could be a simple page with a line drawn with a couple of, mythical dates in your world with key things that happen. Make those things happen at those times. You know what? Sometimes your players' actions will affect them. Sometimes they might delay them. Sometimes they might make those activities happen earlier. But at least have a timeline to what's happening in your world. Keep scenes tight and purposeful. Avoid getting bogged down in long logistics or over planning. So the best way to write a scene is ironically, and I know Liv's going to hate me saying this, is ironically the way Pendragon adventures are written. Keep the scenes tight and purposeful. Keep them to um, the core value of the scene or the core points that are trying to be got across. and don't be too concerned about writing for every possible scenario in a scene. And we'll get to this a little bit later when we talk about motivations and things. But yeah, just keep the scenes tight and purposeful. Don't overdo them. Yeah, I saw that. Introduce tension early. Create mystery, danger, and drama to propel the group forward. If you're running a horror game, Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Mothership, anything like that, tension early is your number one tool to make the players have fun. Everybody who knows they're playing a horror game is expecting to feel danger and scared and worried for their characters. So make sure you build that. Make sure you build that early and build it. You can build it with false positives and red herrings as much as you want. But then have the occasional thing that is a little bit odd or scary as you build up. Also, tension can be really good. So, for example, going back to my Stars Without Number game, straight away, players are immediately thrown into the concept that the world they're on is dying. They can't get off it. They haven't got a spaceship. What are they going to do? Immediate tension, immediate party cohesion, brought everyone together, common goal. Great. Really, really, really great use of story momentum from the word go. Every session should feel like it went somewhere. A discovery was made, a conflict escalated, a relationship changed. You should talk about that in your recap. Every GM, and I know sometimes we are under time pressures to finish and things, but every GM should attempt to finish a little bit before their time of finishing and do a session recap with the players. Get the players to talk about what worked for them that session, what they liked, what they didn't like, what changed their character. I do and I'll provide this at the end when I do the video and everything. I actually ask my players in Stars Without Number, and I have done it with other games, to fill out or not fill out, but to answer some questions at the end of a session. And the questions are all around how did their character feel that session, and what did their character learn, and what changed their character, and that sort of stuff. It's not only pivotal to the players, but it's also as a GM tool. You've just got your next session story seeds, plot hooks, just from those questions. So momentum creates a great sense of adventure, urgency and purpose, pulls players forward and makes every choice feel like it matters now. Momentum is super important. Keep it moving. I will answer the question, Lane, when I get to the end of this section, because it's a longish one. Challenge. Earned victories are the sweetest. Players want to struggle, even if they don't always say so. That's not some sort of 80s what am I thinking of the word? That's not some sort of 80s throwaway cliche. They do want to struggle. No one plays a role-playing game to sit there and dance and have everything go right. There needs to be a sense of what you're doing is worthwhile. Otherwise, you're reading a story that you're not participating in. So make them work for their victories through combat, diplomacy, problem solving, or emotional stakes. Yeah, combat is not the only tool for this. Too many games, particularly of the fantasy genre, are all about the combat. One of the reasons that if you look at a game like RuneQuest, it has survived for 30 or 40 years and been so intensely good is because combat in that game is a last resort, and there is a lot of other stuff that goes on. Diplomacy, problem solving, and one that's not used by new GMs a lot, emotional stakes. Give your players or give the characters an emotional stake. You know, um, I ran a game not long ago, or it must have been maybe it was a year or two ago, where one of the players, and it's almost a cliche, it's almost a trope. Their relative was kidnapped by goblins, but the player backstory was that their parents had died when they were young, and this uncle literally raised them as their parent. So there was this real emotional connection, and just be very careful around emotional stakes. It is something that, as part of your session zero, you should make sure that you have gone through with the players what their triggers are. You do not want to trigger one of their emotional stakes in real life. So that's something to just be mindful for. Tailor challenges to the group's strengths and flaws, test their teamwork, their morals, their creativity, test what their ethics are. When you've got a party that is has a common goal or even a common enemy, a challenge can really bring out the best in the party. It can also really bring out the worst in a party. And be aware of that. You can destroy a party's cohesion with a challenge. You need to be very careful about the types of challenges you do. And that, again, that does come down to learning what your players are looking for from a game as well. And don't be afraid to let them fail. Don't be afraid to have a session end with all the parties unconscious and their enemy standing victoriously over them with them all on 0 hit points or unconscious or insane in the corner. Do not be scared of having them fail. Failure can be interesting. Setbacks spark new storylines or create hard choices. Sometimes those hard choices can also involve character deaths. Character deaths do not need to be the end of a character either. They can be, there's a whole range of things you can do around that. Everything from inspiration for a new character, emotional stakes, if a new character comes along who's tied to an old character, or just the mythology of what happened with that character and their death in a truly heroic moment or tragic moment. So don't be scared to let your players fail. Overwhelming obstacles gives players a sense of triumph and growth. It's also what makes the cool moments truly earned and the story memorable. We've probably all played in games where one person it's come down to one roll or it's come down to one act within a game to save either the party or a group of people or the town or what have you. They are the cool moments, those challenges, and it's even better when everything is on the line and a bad roll can really spawn a whole new story arc. All right, shared spotlight. Everybody gets their moment. So the best sessions are one where everybody walks away with a story to tell. That can be difficult when you have shy players. However, track who's getting attention and who's fading into the background. Call on the quiet ones. Create moments for introverts. What do I mean by that? A classic example I can think of in the past is playing a Call of Cthulhu game with a player who was quite introverted, but who actually was a very cool character and had some very cool abilities that the GM knew about. There was a point during the game where everybody else had failed and this character shone and saved the day. And it's really important to make sure you're aware of what those shy players are playing and cater the moments to them. Doesn't mean that every moment should be catered to them, not at all. Everybody gets to share the spotlight, but they do need their fair share, and it's okay to get them to share that moment. And it's really a really good thing to do is encourage other players at the table to give each other a moment in the spotlight. Sometimes you'll have really overwhelming players, and it's really important to make sure that you talk to those players and just at your session 0, make sure that everybody knows that you'll be sharing the spotlight. Design encounters and plot threads that pull on each character's personal backstory and goals, and that includes the quiet players. And you'll often know when you've got a quiet player or even an extroverted player, you'll do a very, very small thing in your plot that pulls on one of their goals or one of their flaws or something that happened to them in the past, and you'll see them stop and you'll see them look straight at you, and you'll know that you got that little point across, and they all of a sudden they're invested in the game. That sort of stuff is gold. And if someone's having an off day, don't force the spotlight. Make sure it's waiting when they're ready. If you've got a player who's having a difficult time outside a game and you're aware of that, don't necessarily put them in the spotlight when they're having a day where you can already tell that they're not feeling the best or they're not really feeling it. You don't need to force that on them. All you do is you hold those moments until they're right. So yeah, just be aware of that, because that can actually cause you a problem if you're not aware of it. So a game where everyone feels seen and valued creates emotional investment, camaraderie, and deep personal buy-in. I think we spoke about that earlier about how to get players invested. Right there, shared spotlight is one of the key tools to doing that. Everybody feels like they're playing a role, then they're all invested. I don't know about you, but have you ever walked around away from a game and someone's gone, oh yeah, I didn't really do much that session. I didn't really, didn't really feel like I was involved. That's an example of not sharing the spotlight. And we've all seen it, and we've all been a part of it, and we've probably all GM'd it too. So just be aware of that. So, final thoughts. Fun isn't a one-size-fits-all metric. It's a living, evolving alchemy of trust, engagement, and shared imagination. As a GM, your job isn't to entertain the players like an audience, and that's a really key point here. It's to empower them to build unforgettable stories with you. I'll answer Lane's question first. Do you think that bigger changes are more required in longer-term campaigns? No, I do not. And what I will say to you there is I don't think they are, because if you run a single session campaign or if you run a 3-year campaign, a 3-year campaign is all made up of moments. Yes, perhaps it might culminate in a bigger fight at the end, or perhaps the story arc might go on a big tangent. But all those small moments within a game is what makes the game enjoyable. And it's all those really key moments where you've shared the spotlight and you've pulled in Liv's backstory about how she's got a cat that it's larger than normal, and she's been riding it since she's been a teenager, and it's her special friend, and all of a sudden you find out that cat is literally a shape changer that's been sent to protect her by some king that you've never heard of. So all those little changes, all those little things that happen over the course of the game is what will make the game. And all that happens in bigger campaigns, longer campaigns, is they build up, they stack. So the longer you run a game, the longer all those small things stack. And as long as you're doing the same thing, either with a one shot or with a campaign, you'll find they all build up the same. The only difference between a one shot and a campaign ultimately is condensing the story, as in removing some elements of the story to make it fit within a time frame. So it's that adage of, it's that thing you see on Facebook or TikTok or whatever, where someone paints something in an hour and then they paint something in 10 hours. So the brushes are broader, there's less detail, that's the sort of thing, but overall the techniques remain the same. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Yeah, your timeline one was interesting because, like, when you sort of set up something, there's an area that the team are in. You set up what happens at dawn, what happens when they change shifts, what happens at nightfall, and things like that. And if the party's sort of standing around or they're standing in some room, you sort of look at the clock and go, "Oh, what time is it now? What's happening?"
Yeah. No, that's a very valid point. All right, I'll keep going with questions. So second question, in terms of new GMs learning to how to help players share the spotlight, do you have a recommended group size? Absolutely, 4. If you're a new GM, don't go beyond 4. You can do 5 at a stretch, but 4 is a really great size to give you a variance in characters, to keep the players engaged with having a big enough group to give them a little bit of toing and froing. But it also, as a GM, doesn't give you too much to have to think about. You do not want to be doing too many players over 4. You can do it. It's just harder for you until you have the experience. That's all. You've recommended how to engage with the quiet player, but how do you rein in players who are too abrasive in their play style? Okay, so there is several things you can do with abrasive players. First of all, are you talking about the character is abrasive? Because if the character is abrasive, that's completely different to a player being abrasive. If a player is abrasive, that comes down to a lot of your expectations around session 0. There is nothing wrong with saying to players at the very start of the game, your expectation as a GM is that they will work together. Anyone who wants to play in an abrasive manner, that's not going to cut it. I know that sounds harsh, but at the end of the day, you're also looking out for 3, 5 other players. So if you get too many abrasive players in a game and you haven't vetted that, your game will not go ahead. It will end spectacularly, but not in a way you'd like. Yeah. How do you deal with player death? Player death's a great one. I personally love player death. I love it when my characters die. It gives them a moment to shine. Player death it needs to be profound. At the end of the day, every player is playing their character to have fun and to feel like their character matters and share that spotlight. So a player death should share the spotlight. Never, ever, 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 unless the player specifically asks you to, never kill a character out of scene. Always allow the character to have their moment to shine. Even if they shine spectacularly badly and fail, let them have their moment for a character death. Have in your mind, if a player is going to die or you think a player is going to die, have in your mind, even before you've run the session, have a small section of your prep where you basically say, what happens if a player dies? Make sure that there is a story effect. Make sure that when they turn up to session 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever it is after a player has died, a character has died, there is something that reminds the other players of that death and it matters. Okay? That will make your game memorable and it will make the players feel really invested, including the player who had their character die. And yeah, liking to give them a closing moment is perfect. That's exactly what I'm talking about. All right. Any other questions or shall we move forward? Yep. Yeah, works great in Paranoia too. One thing I've noticed with Paranoia over the years, Pat, is sometimes the games can get to the point where clone death is almost irrelevant, and that's okay. That actually works for Paranoia, but sometimes it should have a real profound effect. And even in Paranoia, when it's routine that you've lost, your 13th clone in a row, make sure that there is an impact on the story arc. Make sure that that 13th clone dying might have actually pushed the lever that the other 12 didn't, or something like that has an impact moving forward. So make the death matter. Yeah.
How
All
do
right.
you?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
How do
go
you
Eddie.
deal with a group that sort of sidetracked themselves, but are just clearly enjoying themselves while paying no attention at all to your sort of narrative?
All right. So my question here to you is is their fun diminished, or is your vanity hurt because they're not playing your story? Because if it's your vanity being hurt because they're not playing your story, you need to repivot on how you're thinking about it and actually use their fun and their tangent that they've gone off to either bring them back or to pursue that, because obviously they're enjoying it. There's a difference between complete derailment and I think I talk about it later on, Gremlins and Gold. There's a little bit of a difference between just getting bogged down in rules lawyering or stuff that isn't fun. But if they've gone off the rails but they're having a ball, I challenge you. I say to you, don't buy into thinking that that's a problem. Actually embrace it, and you'll find that your story ends up being better for it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, yeah, all good.
It can be very hard as a GM because we put so much effort into everything we do, and we've all got these cool stories we want to tell. And one of the hardest things I've found over the years, and one that I really enjoy now, is actually letting go of my stories, having my story, but then letting go and letting the players run with that and take it in ways that I honestly just would never have even thought of. And it always makes it better. All right. Know thy table. Session 0, lines and veils, safety tools, group expectations. Before the first dice hits the table, before the first NPC monologues or sword is drawn, build the foundation of trust with clarity and consent. Isn't a checklist. It's how you forge the social contract that will carry your group through battles, betrayals, heartbreaks, and triumphs. Session 0. So really is the prelude to an adventure. I really, really enjoy doing character building with players as part of session 0. It allows you as a GM to pretty much write your first session, if you haven't already decided what you're going to write, simply through their relationships and how their characters have come into being. Pay really close attention to it. It's going to provide you with plot hooks and story seeds for long into your games. So expectations from the players on how the game will run are just as important as your expectations. I cannot stress this enough. The GM's expectations on how the players interact with the game is super important. If you go into session 0 and your players give you all these expectations of all the things that they want to happen in the game, that's fantastic and that's good, and you should take note of that. But if that's completely at odds to how you want to run the game, tell them that in session 0 and say, this game isn't going to be for you. I think I need to find some different players. And you'll either get them go, okay, what were your expectations? And then you'll get a dialogue and you'll end up getting to where you want to go. Or they'll go, oh, no, well, we don't want to do that. And that's okay. It's okay. It's okay to walk away from that game and find other players. Because at the end of the day, as a GM, if your expectations aren't being met as much as the players' expectations are being met, it's not going to work. It's not going to be fun. And there's been many instances I've had done this myself where I've run a game, particularly early on, where I haven't really been happy with the way the group's playing, or the direction the game's gone on, because my expectations and the players' expectations were different. So I really urge you to be super honest about that in session 0. Setting the tone. Tone is super, super important early on. If you want to run a serious Call of Cthulhu and your players are wanting to play it like Scooby-Doo or Monty Python or whatever, it's not going to work for you. And vice versa. If you want to run it as Monty Python and they're interested in a serious Call of Cthulhu game, guess what? Guess how many players you're going to have for session 2? Not many. So make sure the tone is set from the start. Really, when you align the tone for the player and GM together and it's the same, you really do get players that are invested in what you're doing. It's really powerful. Themes. Have a theme. Before you start the first session of your game, have a theme. So I'll give you an example. My Stars Without Number game, my theme is hard science fiction noir. That's what the game is built around. So it's built around sci-fi such as Blade Runner, Dune, that kind of feel. It's not built around Star Wars. It's not built around Star Trek. It's a different kind of theme. So make sure that your theme is really, really well discussed in that session 0. Make sure the players understand that, this is going to be an honor. So I'm going to take a leaf here. So I'm just going to assume vampire. So let's say that it's about, redemption. It's about having lost your humanity. And, the game that I want to run is about the vampires redeeming themselves and refining their humanity, or completely giving into their vampiric nature and losing their humanity. So really defining that at session 0 is another way, again, of making sure that everybody is on the same page as to what the expectation is at the table. Create it together. Let your players shape parts of the world. You sit down at your D&D table and you're making some characters for session 0, and Michelle turns around and says, I've got a beloved mentor that's a kitsune that taught me everything I know about performance. Include that in your story. Make sure you include some sort of link to that background. Because the moment you pull that out, that player is going to go, oh, wow, that is so cool. That's just like, oh, hang on, maybe it's related to me. All right. And you get that investment and that. So session 0 is, as I was saying at the very beginning, really, really powerful place to get your ongoing plot hooks, story seeds, and all that sort of stuff. Make sure that and this is something I've been doing probably the last 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. Part of session 0, make sure you do a relationship table. And that doesn't even necessarily mean that every character needs to have a direct relationship, but they should know if they don't have a direct relationship with another character, they should have a reason for being there. So relationship tables, for those who don't know, is generally a drawn map with each character's name written in a corner, with lines detailing how they know each other, how they don't know each other, how they might have interacted with each other, or what their connection might be. Get the players to tell you what that is. The more the players tell you what that is, the more buy-in they have from the get-go. House rules, clarify rulings, homebrew mechanics, all that sort of stuff. How XP and advancement will work is one that new GMs forget. Make sure you talk about that as part of your session 0. Clarify rulings. You don't like how honor works in L5R? You want to change how that is for this game. Make sure the players know from, day dot. There can be no misunderstandings. There can be no rules arguing, any of that sort of stuff if you clarify it from word go. Everybody's aware of it. Everybody's cool with it. And often you can nut out some things that are potentially a problem before they become a problem. So, and obviously the logistics, when to play, how often, what happens when someone misses a session is a big one. And set clear, fair expectations up front. I told my Pathfinder players that I wanted to run a regular game session, and I was prepared for them to miss a session here and there, or in the case of Reese, I think, who's on this call, couldn't be there every couple of weeks. That's okay, but my expectation was when that wasn't the case that they would turn up. That didn't work, so the game ended up winding up. So be very clear in your expectations of when you can meet, how whether you'll run a game for 3 people instead of 4, or 3 instead of 5, or 3 instead of 6, or 4 instead of 6, or whatever it is. Be really clear on those expectations from the start. Honestly, it's not rocket science. A lot of this stuff, you establish it early, you have less problems later. Yeah. So session 0 builds buy-in. Everyone feels ownership over the game and its tone, so they're more engaged from the start. If players don't, if they argue with you about the tone, or they don't want to play it in that style, it's okay to walk away. Or to say to them, I don't think, if you've got 3 players that are buying in and a 4th who isn't, it's okay to say to that 4th player, hey, I don't think this game's for you. It's no hard feelings. I just don't think it's what you're looking for. Lines and veils, setting emotional boundaries. So lines and veils are tools to help define what content is okay in your table and what's not. They have always been very important. They just are a lot more formalized now than when I first started playing. We didn't even call it lines and veils then. We just talked about it as part of what was our session 0 that we didn't call session 0 back in those days. It was just a case of sitting down and saying, hey, if this game's got a little bit of bloodthirstiness, are you okay with that? If it's got this, and nowadays it's a bit better because it's a bit more formalized. I actually have a form I give to my players. You can find forms online in all sorts of players if you search lines and veils. Some of them are really good, some of them not so good. Have a look around. Some are just way too many things. Some are much more reasonable. Generally, I try and keep it to a single page. I think a single page of stuff for people to either tick or cross is good, and that allows me as a GM and you as a GM to walk away and go, right, okay, there are some real issues here around, let's go romance. People don't want romance. So you just don't include it, or you include it as veils, fade to black, which I'll discuss in a sec. So lines are hard boundaries. So that might be something like child violence. That might be, sexual content. It could be something as specific as eyeballs. I don't like eyeballs being crushed, or animal cruelty. Good one. Yeah. So if someone, generally on the lines and veils forms you can find online, they'll normally have 3 columns. One will be a veil. One will be okay, one will be a veil, one will be a line. Lines, if a line is ticked in your game, if someone says they've got a line for something, non-negotiable, do not do it. Do not include it. If it's in your game, write it out. Just remove it at that point. Yeah, that's just how it is. Veils are fade to black. And again, things like romance. So where you might, people just might not be comfortable with it. You have a romantic in the moment in the game, you fade it to black. You just don't go into any great detail about it. You hint at it. You can have it happen off at a scene. Veils are good for that sort of stuff. And definitely encourage your players to set that. Do not tell them what their lines and veils are, because what your lines and veils are not what theirs are. Some players and GMs don't have any boundaries. Me personally, I literally don't have anything off the table. That's not because I'm psychotic, although it could be. It's mainly because when I role play, I have played some games that have been super serious, that have really touched on really difficult subjects, and I actually enjoy that. I actually enjoy the humanity of playing some things that I would never do in real life, or things that I would never encounter in real life, and how would I deal with them as a character. So that's okay too. But cater to your table. Just to be clear on lines, the person with the most, so any lines are just non-negotiable. It doesn't matter whether one person at the table has something ticked and no one else does. That means it doesn't get included in that game. You just shouldn't do it. So a safe table is a trusting table. When the players feel emotionally secure, they engage more fully and with more courage. Using lines and veils properly, your players are more invested because they're safe, and that's what we want. We want safe players and safe GMs. So. Which brings us to safety tools. Even with lines and veils in place, things can surprise us. It does happen. Sometimes you'll get a player forget, and I'm not mentioning any players in particular, but I do know of at least one. That's where safety tools come in. They are the catch-all. As a GM, get in the habit of, if a player taps an X or holds up an X, immediately skip, fade out, or change content. Or roll back immediately, no questions asked, no discussion required, not an "are you okay," nothing like that. Just roll it back, take it out of the game. Doing that will make the player feel safe, and will just bring everything back to a point where it's not an issue. If you get a player who continues to do that, you need to stop the game. You need to hold the X card up and make a very clear statement to them that what they have just done or said is not on, and they have a choice of either stepping away from the table or continuing with you having rolled it back. I cannot be categoric enough in saying that that's just how it needs to be. Everybody needs to feel safe. So, yeah. Open door. Any player can walk away from the game at any time for any reason, no justification required. Same deal. If something happens and they do get upset, allow them to walk. They need it. Pause the game if you want. Check in on them. And you should do that at some point. Sometimes it's better to actually let them walk it off for a sec, because they might need that space. But as a GM, be aware it happens, and just make sure that you have things in place that if you need to pause the game. Stars and wishes, which is what I mentioned earlier, particularly for debriefs after the session. Players share something they loved and something they hope to see more of. There's your plot seeds, your plot hooks, and your story seeds right there. The things they love, include more of them. The things they want to see, put it as a story seed. Put it as a hook. You've now all of a sudden got a really good piece of bait if there is a particular way you want your story to go. If a player says to you, "Oh yeah, I really want to investigate where that river goes," and you've been trying to get them up the river for 9 sessions, you've now got a hook that player. So take note of that stuff. Normalize using these tools and make sure you model them as the GM. Safety tools, super important. Be aware, as much as we like to think that it never happens, it does. So just be really clear on how you use them, and don't be scared to be assertive. I'm not going to say aggressive, I'm going to say assertive. Don't be scared to be assertive if you need to pull up a player with the next card. Don't make it a personal thing. Just say, that doesn't happen in my game, we're rolling it back. Pretty easy. Group expectations. All right. So every group has different play styles. You can get yours aligned real early with role-playing focus. So again, session 0 with stuff we're talking here. Are they here for some heavy role-playing? Are they here for tactical combat, exploration, whatever it is? player behavior, get the feel for the vibe. Generally, session 0, you can get a feel for the vibe. If people are being really goofy, guess what? That's what the game is going to be like, unless you talk to them and give them your expectation and they all agree of something different. But watch the table. Watch what people are doing, even when they're making characters up. Watch their interaction. You'll see the best friends, laughing with each other, joking. You'll see the quiet player doing their character by themselves, or what have you. Rules engagement. Does everybody need to know the rules? Or are you okay with hand holding newbies? It's okay as a GM to say, no, I want to run a really serious game. This is quite a complex game. I'm not taking newbies. That's okay. It's okay for the GM to have those expectations. Don't beat yourself up. It's better for you to say that at the beginning and make sure you've got the right sort of players for the game you're playing, and they've got the right GM, than allowing someone in and then having it not work for you or for them. Tone consistency. Horror and humor are not mutually exclusive. You can play them together. In fact, some of the most enjoyable Call of Cthulhu games I've ever played, or even Delta Green actually, have involved horror and humor often in the same scene. It can happen. It does work really well. But be consistent. If you're running a humorous game, don't then run it for 6 sessions. It's all fun and games, and then have a truly horrific terrorizer kind of session where all of a sudden people run from the room screaming. Just be aware of your consistency. And you can even do things, and I haven't done it for a while, but it is something I have done in the past, and I did it with many years ago when I ran Call of Cthulhu Horror on the Orient Express, which I ended up running for 6 years. That was the longest campaign I ever ran. We did have a group charter, which was a whole heap of bullet points that the players wrote up in what was effectively session 0, that summarise expectations for any new players that join in at a later point. Once you've got a group and you've agreed on what your tone is, what the focus is, behavior, rules, all that sort of stuff, get a player or get the group of players to document it. Because 6 months down the track, when you lose a player because they've moved and you get a new player, it's really, really helpful to hand it to them and say, hey, here's how our game runs. Are you cool with all of this? And they'll either look at it and go, yeah, that sounds awesome. Or they're going to go, yeah, no, I'm not really into heavy role play. Again, you're not the right fit. It just helps. So super handy one, the group charter. Any long-term campaign games, I'd suggest you guys write one at session 0. Yeah. Misaligned expectations are the number one killer of campaigns. They literally are. If you get ahead of it, you're already in a good place for your game. Make sure at that session 0, everybody is clear on what's being run, how it's going to be run, what the expectations are, what the players want, what the GM wants, and hopefully when you get all that aligned, you've got the start of a really good campaign. So, knowing your table isn't a one-time task. It's an ongoing conversation. Be curious, be flexible, and always prioritize the people at the table over the plot on the page, because when everybody feels seen, heard, and safe, that's when it all really begins. Questions? Silence. Got everybody scared.
No, I think you covered that one pretty well.
Okay.
No, I can't think of anything.
All right, so I'm just looking at the time, 8:47. So that is actually section 1. So I'm way behind what I thought I would be, but that's okay. Do you want me to continue on, everyone?
I'm easy. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good. All right, let's move on. Building a game that wants to be played. 30 minutes more. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. So you reckon about 1:15? All right. Indulge me once more as I drag you screaming into the world of Delta Green. Operation Late Harvest. The road to Ash Ridge narrows as the sun dips low, casting long warp shadows across the cracked asphalt. Wind rustles the corn stalks on either side, too tall for March, too pale for summer. The air carries a chemical tang, faint and sour, like fertilizer mixed with old pennies. Town sign leans on an angle, riddled with rust and buckshot. Welcome to Ash Ridge, population 1237. Beneath it, someone has crawled, not counting what lies underneath. It's been half erased, but not well enough. Your convoy of government issue rental sedans rolls past a faded gas station, a dark post office, and a Lutheran church with peeling paint. The Sunset Diner is still open. Its flickering sign is the only light besides the sodium glow of the water tower. Somewhere behind it, the hills loom black against the dusk, dotted with the hollowed skeletons of old mining rigs. You haven't spoken much since the briefing. Maybe it's the strangeness of the case. Maybe it's the silence of the town, pressing in like a held breath. The girl's body is at the city morgue. Official cause of death, unknown trauma. Unofficially, the coroner flagged something off. Her blood work doesn't map right, and her bones seem newer than the rest of her. You're not here as yourself. Not really. Dr. Ward pretends to be CDC, but her questions are always too precise. She watches everyone's hands. Agent Finch has an old DEA badge and a new file full of erratic behaviour reports. He mutters about patterns that never made it into the paperwork. Specialist Park says nothing. She hasn't since they left Indianapolis. But she checks her firearm twice and the exits 3 times. Father Alice wears his priest's collar like a costume. His flask is empty again. He keeps staring at the old mine maps like he remembers something from them, something he shouldn't. Across the street, a boy on a rusted bicycle watches you from behind the shadows of an elm tree. He's not moving. He doesn't wave. But you're certain he's been watching you since you pulled into town. And now the lights change, and he's not there. A storm is coming. The town knows it. You don't hear crickets or birds, just the buzz of the diner's sign, the kind of buzz that gets inside your teeth. The mission is simple. A dead girl, a strange body, keep it quiet. But there's something in the dirt here, in the walls, and it knows you've arrived. A great game isn't one that's fully written, it's one that feels alive. The air tastes different in a real world. The shadows move, the tavern owner has a secret, the map has smudged corners and unknown edges, and the world doesn't sit there frozen waiting for the players. It moves whether they act or not. But here's the secret. You don't have to build it all at once. You just need to build it right. You start small, leave space for player input, and let the world evolve. So, start small, build a vivid corner, not a whole continent. Begin your campaign with a focused regional location, a single village, a district of a city, a single mountain valley, a borderland outpost, a diner in a strange northwestern American town. Detail what's relevant to the players now. The local lord, the cult in the ruins, the merchant guild in debt. Anchor the setting in a few strong themes. Again, going back to what we discussed in session 0. Honor versus ambition, decay of an empire, survival on the frontier. Use recurring symbols, factions, or rituals that give the world texture. Tattooed bird cult, blood moons, annual ghost festival, child riding a bike. You don't need to explain the whole pantheon, the whole economic system, or the whole global's history up front. Let that emerge naturally through play. My Stars Without Number game didn't even explain to the players from the beginning what much about the world they were on. It was all about the characters. So a narrow focus gives players clarity and investment. It makes the world feel rich, but not overwhelming. So leave space for players' input. Invite your players to fill in the blanks, not just in backstory, but in world lore. Ask them the name of their hometown. Ask them the name of their mentor or the clan their family fell out with. Let them define the details. What's something everyone in your village believes, even if it's not probably true? Again, going back to the relationship table in session 0, another good place for them to define the world. So use their choices to anchor them in the world. When they care about things, they play differently. They're invested. And I think we discussed in one of the earlier questions about how you get players invested. This is how you get them invested. You give them pieces of your world for them to build their own pieces in. You don't have to surrender control of your setting, not at all. You're just opening the doors. You're giving them ownership and space within your setting to add their own details, to put their own fingerprints on things. And the more they do that, the more invested they become and the more the world becomes their own. So it's all about collaborative world building, and it builds trust, investment, and personal stakes. They don't just stop playing in your world, they start living in it because it's their world. Ah, yes, letting the world evolve. So your world should react and grow. You should change the world in response to players' actions and in ways that surprise you. Villains regroup, towns rebuild or don't. A side NPC becomes a folk hero thanks to a bard song. Sometimes it's the innocuous things that, as a GM, you might go, okay, let's take the bard song as an example. So, local farmer fights with the party to drive off orcs that have invaded a town, and the bard sings about him and everyone else in the local tavern after it, and the song takes off. All of a sudden, this farmer, his whole life is thrown upside down. He leaves his wife. He's got a whole heap of groupies. He goes off on his own journey and voyage and joins a party, and in 6 months he's become a traveling warrior in his own right. Or worse, 3 months later he finds himself alone and dying in a dungeon somewhere and curses the bard's name. These sorts of things are what you should do. There should be reactions to players' actions, sometimes innocuous, sometimes grandiose. Let time pass. Wars will escalate. Crops will fail. New leaders will rise. Time is a really neglected part, I think, in some GM's repertoire. And the easiest way to make time apparent to the characters is seasons. Use the seasons. Make it winter. Make it autumn. Make it summer. Make it hot. Make it cold. All of those things. Keep a world clock or a timeline for events that progress even if the players ignore them. Going back to your timeline. Make sure you keep that. Show the consequences of player choices, social, spiritual, political. The players have stood up and said that, argued with the mayor that the local sheriff is right, and the local sheriff cares more about the people than the mayor does. Next thing you know, thanks to the players' words and a lot of townsfolk overhearing it, the sheriff is now the new mayor. The problem is the sheriff is not very good at managing the finances of the town and finds himself in severe debt. All those sorts of things, player consequences. The story doesn't need to be static until the players arrive. It should be moving, breathing, always one step away from something bigger. Change gives weight to actions. When the players realise that the world is watching, they act differently. When the players realise that their actions have consequences, good and bad, they tend to think more about what they're doing. Bonus tips. Use the senses. Going back to the Delta Green description I gave you of the story, you'll notice I used a lot of things around senses, feeling, smelling. Let your world be smelled, tasted, heard. Is the air heavy with spice or the stink of gunpowder? Is the tavern floor sticky with spilled plum wine? Yep, 2 minutes. 3 detail rule. When describing a place, give 3 evocative details, something visual, something odd, and something that hints at a deeper story. You can swap visual for any other sense, really. Yeah, that's a really good tip to make every scene interesting. Let NPCs want things. Stable Master is saving to buy back his family's ancestral sword. Noble hates music but can't admit why. Small motivations equal big depth. Final thoughts. A world that breathes isn't defined by its size but by its soul. Start small, invite the players to plant seeds and let it grow. All right. Do you have thoughts on giving the players space for input in a setting which has so much lore based on it and where the entire game is based on that setting? I'm guessing you're probably mentioning Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. You can absolutely give players the ability to plant seeds in that, and I'll run an analogy here to Pendragon. Pendragon, overarchingly, is built around Arthur's tale, right? So, yeah, One Ring, yeah. So it has a similar problem to the One Ring, Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, any of those Star Wars, Star Trek to a certain extent, all of those games. My thought, and generally the best way to play those sorts of settings, is have the players can interact with the key players, but generally they are outside the player's story. So in the One Ring, sure, you've got the whole thing going on with the Nazgul hunting Frodo, da 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 da. But what if one of your characters wears the ring, and what if the Nazgul mistake it as the One Ring? You know, you've got all these Pendragon. Sure, the characters can interact with Arthur in the court, but they should never be found on a battlefield with him where there is the opportunity for them to kill him. Ever. Keep them separate. Allow the lore that makes the setting so unique to exist, but allow the players to make their own changes and affect their own story. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Keep it safe. Yep, that's it. Keep it safe. That's it. Because you don't want to lose that lore either, because it's so powerful, and that's why you play those games. Any other questions? So the next section is plot hooks and story seeds. Do you want me to continue and do that one, or it is 9 o'clock? Yeah, leave it till next time. Okay. All right, we'll stop it at plot hooks and story seeds, and I'll do that for the next session. Did we want to finish with any other questions about what I have covered so far? Cliffhanger, yeah. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I will stop the recording, and hopefully everybody has got something out of this. I will try and put this up on perhaps YouTube. See how we go. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, man.